Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Green Factor, a show where we talk about green design and the business of sustainability. I'm your host, Haris the Green Carpenter, and today we'll be talking about what goes behind green buildings. Today with me, we have Mr. Gregers Reimann. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Harriet.
Welcome to the show. So, just to share a little bit with viewers and listeners, few years ago, I imagined having a beautiful factory inside a forest. So when I Google, and then I found, wow, it's a nice factory with greeneries and all that. So I put it in my presentation, or not presentation, but more of a board that of inspiration. And then I think a year after that, I met Gregers, and then we talked, and then he said that he worked with green buildings and all that, and then he said one of it is pyramid. So the pyramid building, which is the building that I saw and admire. So that is, since then I've been like so amazed with faith, and also I want you to come over to the show and just share a little bit, because even though my a lot that I do is mostly focusing on interior, but green buildings is one of the things that I feel that we need to have discussion more as well. So before we go into the topic, for the benefit of the viewers, Gregers, can you just share a little bit about what you do and your journey for us to roughly know what you do?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the invitation to speak. So I'm basically, I like to say I'm half Malaysian because I've been living and working here for 17 years already. But obviously I'm not from Malaysia originally. I'm from Denmark. And my journey to Malaysia started in 1999 when I came here as a student. So I spent one semester at UPM, and that was because my parents were living in Malaysia at the time. And so I took the opportunity to do an exchange program. And at the time, I was studying my master's. I'm an energy efficiency engineer, and I was specializing in energy efficient buildings, and also in buildings that have good thermal comfort and also a good indoor environmental quality. So this has to do with air quality and the acoustic environment and all that. So I came here and spent half a year at UPM, and that was really interesting because I was used to, from Denmark, it was all about insulating the buildings and keeping the heat inside the buildings. But of course, in Malaysia, it was the other way. You need to keep the heat outside the buildings. So it was a completely different way of looking at buildings. But of course, the laws of nature are the same. And also I used a sort of relatively sophisticated building simulation software, which was a quite new thing here in Malaysia. So at the end of my half-year stay, we did a little sort of symposium, and I presented some simulation results, and I could see it actually garnered quite a bit of interest here in Malaysia as well. So that was sort of my first contact to Malaysia, and then from those contacts that I made back in 1999, that brought me back in 2005 in my current job, basically. So I'm from IEN Consultants. So we are the pioneering green building consultancy in Malaysia. Originally, we focused a lot on just energy efficiency, and now, of course, we look wider, also at green buildings and the health and well-being of the building occupants.
Awesome. So I think before we go into the details, I think it's important to understand the current issues. So in terms of sustainable building or green building, what are the issues that talk about right now?
Yeah, the biggest issue I would say in the last few years is the global understanding that we really have to decarbonize because global warming and these catastrophic, irreversible effects of global warming is something that will be much worse than COVID, for example. The problem is it's sort of quite slow moving, so we don't feel it. But if you're in the know, you know this is really a very serious issue. So there's a momentum to decarbonize our whole society. So that means we shouldn't emit any CO2 emissions or other greenhouse gases. And the building sector accounts for about 40% of these greenhouse gas emissions. So we cannot do it without getting it right in the building sector. And the good news is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruits in the building sector. So if you want to have a lot of reduction of greenhouse gases for not too much money, you should really start with the building sector. So I would say that's the main issue. And the two sort of major issues we have to do is to basically push energy efficiency. And we have shown that already with many of our buildings here in Malaysia, that you can fairly easily, if you design it right, cut your energy bill to 50% or even lower. And the next main issue, which is a little bit a new territory, is that we have to focus on the embedded carbon in building materials. So, for example, the carbon emissions from using concrete and from using steel is quite significant. And this has to be tackled. We have to start looking into alternative building materials. And Harriet, maybe I can ask you back, because I remember discussing this with you previously, and I was quite excited to learn that you are actually looking into using wood, structural wood. So that means instead of building a building from steel or from concrete, we could actually use wood, which of course has close to zero carbon emissions. You could actually argue it has a negative carbon footprint because it stores carbon from the atmosphere that the trees have absorbed from the atmosphere. So this is one of the future developments that we that we need to focus on. And maybe you can just share a little bit about what you're doing on this area.
Sure. I think in terms of sustainable building in Malaysia, we already have few frameworks that have been used. So we have the GPI index. We also have LEED and other international standards that can be used. However, I see a lot of the issue is not on the building or infrastructure yet in terms of the knowledge. I think it's more on the interior, so the fit out, the furniture, and the things in there that we need to look more into as well to make it wholly sustainable. So because if the building is sustainable and the items in there is not sustainable, then still we won't get the effect that we want. And I think other things surrounding sustainable building is also the waste generated during construction. For us, we are an interior contractor, so we do large-scale interior projects. So we know there's so much waste being created. Research has showed, but this is an old research, 69% of the waste generated in construction are actually timber in Malaysia. So there's a lot of issue in terms of surrounding waste and also timber. However, back to the example or the topic about using more timber, because right now the discussion used to be first green products. After a while, it becomes sustainability, and then it becomes circularity, and now we're talking about carbon. So there's so much layers of sustainability or things that are making a lot of people also, in a way, which one do we do? Especially for smaller companies, right? There's always more and more things to do. So that's why one of the things that people normally look is obviously material in terms of construction and all that. And wood is one of the material that is carbon neutral in a way compared to other material. So that's why you are seeing a lot of European, Western countries are using mass timber structures, and it's proven to last as long and even fire resistant as concrete. So there are ways to utilize timber, but still it's still a relatively new area, and not a lot of people want to get involved because of the misconception and all that. So it's a long way, but I would love to do timber buildings in the future, just to prove a point.
Let's do it together.
Yeah, yeah.
I would love
So
to do that too. And I
yeah,
also understand the fire code or the building code is supposed to be changed, so this also becomes possible because that's one of
yeah. Good.
the
The
hindrances
things
so
that
far.
is happening, right? So
Mm.
I think the question that we need to clarify first before we go into the technicalities is why. Why would a business want to make their building sustainable?
Um, well, I mean, the simple question, or the simple answer is it's cheaper. Um, so so you don't really have to care about saving the planet or anything. Um, you can just look at the economic aspect, and the conclusion is clear. It's cheaper. And now that you brought up the Pyramid Factory, which is the building behind me, uh, this client basically wanted what he called a cheap building, um, and and he knew that cheap for him meant a highly energy efficient and green building, because he knew he had to pay the bills. So he didn't want to be stuck with a conventional building that might be a bit cheaper to construct up front, but then you're stuck with these very high energy bills. So this building behind me, we we uh, we were the energy efficiency consultants and green building consultants for this building, and and we managed to achieve a 40% reduction of the energy consumption compared to the old factory, which was also in Penang. So the client was very happy about that, and a lot of people who see this building, they'll say, "Wow, very impressive." I even had a taxi driver who said, "Wow, is this a resort or what is it?" When he dropped me off, but it's an electronics factory, and the reason to make it so green as well, and lush with greenery, is that it simply improves the human well-being. Um, so we have gotten really good feedback from the staff, and they just write that this workplace is like a second home. I mean, they really feel so de-stressed and nice working in this building. Every space in this factory we designed to have daylight and to have views out. And we worked with the Malaysian architect called Design Units Architect to achieve this. And that means a lot to the client, because that means you have staff that are simply look forward to coming to work, are much more productive when they are at work, have less sick days, and you have a much higher staff retention as well, because it's such a great place to work. So there's actually enormous economic benefits to going green. And then I haven't even mentioned, I mean, the biggest benefit is that we are ensuring, by going green in earnest, that we leave a livable planet to our children and future generations. Of course, it's a bit difficult to put a price tag on that. sort of on an individual basis, but that's the overall reason why we really have to go green.
Mm. I love that you say that it can be not about the environment as well, because for me, when I first started to implement sustainability in the business, it's about saving the environment. But after a while, I saw a lot of benefits of having it in the business. We get better margins, new revenue stream, cost reduction, even talent acquisition. So in a way, what has been happening is we are using sustainability as a competitive advantage. So that is why, like this past few years, I've decided to pick up activism, especially to focus more on businesses to adopt sustainability. And we need to be aware that not a lot of people really want to do it for the sake of the environment. But if we talk about dollars and cents, about bottom line, about competitive advantage, then they want to listen. And if they see proof, especially rather than just hearsay and all that, then they see it and then they will, oh, okay, then I want to get involved. So this is what we want. We want more people that is non-environmentalist to be in it because it's worth their time. So and I love that you bring up in terms of cost, it's cheap, because a lot of people think that when you say green building or green product, it associated with being expensive, being it's difficult to maintain and those kind of thing. So the next question would be, what are the consideration if you want to talk about green building? It's not just the building material. There's so many things, right? But what are the main things that you normally would look into in terms of the designing it?
Mm. Yeah. Well, just on the point of cheap. So we just did a very interesting interview with the facility manager of one of our other green buildings, which has now operated for 12 years. And she was sort of leaving her job as facility manager of this green building. It's the ST Diamond building in Putrajaya. And so I took the opportunity to sit down with her and ask her how is it then to operate the building? Because my job as a green building designer is to make sure you get a green building in the design, but I'm not operating it. And one of the questions that I asked her is it more expensive or is it cheaper to operate a green building? And she immediately said it's cheaper. And I think the common perception is that green buildings are it's going to be expensive and it's almost like a luxury item that nice to have, but if we have to save some cost, okay, this is the first thing we cut. Quite on the contrary, it's actually much more expensive to build a normal building, because you are basically stuck with an inefficient building that has probably poor indoor climate and high energy bills. And then you have to deal with this building for decades. But that's the sort of the perception. The one of my probably main challenges when I walk into the room, people are like, "Ooh, this is going to be expensive to do a green building," and actually, quite on the contrary, it's going to be really cheap if you do the right thing. So it also has to do with educating the public and clients about this. And that's why it's great you do this podcast as well to raise awareness about these issues. But okay, getting back to your question on what are the
Considerations.
Whether we should consider going for green buildings, right? Or what are the items we do? So I would say first off, like for the pyramid building, it's very important that the client wants a green building and supports that idea. And that was certainly the case here. And then you bring in a green building consultant like myself or others from the beginning. So I'm not going to design the building. I'm an engineer, but that means from this concept design, you can basically bounce off various design ideas, and we can help the building design to go in the right direction. So, for example, for this building, the architect already had the idea of having this big louver. I mean, the picture behind me, this big fixed aluminium louver to shade the whole office area of the factory. And then we could then work out, yeah, that's a good idea, and this is how we should place the fins, so we get the right shading. So these fins are designed to shade the building completely from around just past noon and the whole afternoon. So that means you actually protect the windows, but also all the green roofs that you can see outside the offices are actually usable green roofs because it's shaded, and we're in an industrial area, so there's a lot of wind and breeze. So it's actually a very pleasant environment out there. So these are some of the things where, I mean, getting the architecture right, working with the climate instead of against the climate is very important. And that's where because we can build up these buildings in our 3D software and run hour-by-hour simulations of the building using the Malaysian weather data. So we can basically quantify, so what is the thermal comfort going to be? What is the energy consumption going to be? And how does that improve if we change the glazing, if we change the shading? So you could say all the trial and error happens in the computer and not at the construction site. So this way, green becomes a design sort of driver for the project instead of an afterthought. So I think those are our best projects where we are in from the beginning. So the main considerations is definitely getting the architecture right, the orientation, and designing the building so we can make use of the daylighting. So basically getting typically diffuse light from the sky in, which is softer and not the direct sunlight, but the diffuse light, and in the right quantity, so it's not overpowering, and so it's not glary. So this way you can actually, in the daytime, almost you never have to switch on the electric lights unless there's a rainstorm or something. So this is sort of this passive design is the first consideration, and then the second main consideration is working on all the active systems. So here we work a lot with the mechanical and electrical engineers in particular, and make sure that we have efficient cooling systems, fans, motors, also the controls are very efficient. Efficient lighting and making sure it's daylight responsive, so the light is not on when there's enough daylight, these kind of things. And then at the very end, you can bring in the renewable energies to offset some of the energy consumption and get a zero energy building if you have enough roof area for that. So these are sort of in broad terms the main considerations. And then often the clients would want some kind of green building certification. So that could be the Malaysian GBI, it could be Green Re, it could be the international LEED, which is from the US, or the UK BREEAM. So we can also then help to do that and make sure we design to fulfill whatever criteria we're going for. And then you have to submit for each of these credits. So the more you do, the more credits you get. It's sent off to a third-party assessor, and then they will either approve or not award the points. And then in the end, based on how many points you get the final green building certification from this third-party institution. Yeah, so that's so yeah, we'll tick the boxes, but the main consideration for us is to really get a building that works, that has the performance. and where we also design things that can be maintained, right? So we don't have kind of white elephants where
Yep,
it looks
projects.
good, but it breaks down immediately and is never used.
Hmm. So it's good and all, but in a way that we can say that it all depends also on the location, right? So we need to leverage on the climate, the wind direction, the sun direction. So there's a lot of this technical thing that I think now is easier to make because we have a simulation, we have computers, right? So I think the process of designing as well has become more efficient and more cheaper because the data is easily accessible. However, what is that has made the design easier and more efficient, but what are the challenges right now in terms of designing or building this kind of building?
I think the challenge is mostly people. Um, the the technical issues we can solve. We basically know what to do. Um, but as I mentioned before, this notion that going green is expensive is something we have to face every day. And therefore, if we, let's say, for example, for this building, a lot of people who see it, they are very impressed by it. It's also won a lot of awards, also internationally. But they would say, "Wow, that aluminium roof looks really expensive," and they would cut that out immediately. um, and then we we will have, I mean, we can run our simulations. Sure, it will give some more solar load if we didn't have that roof, and you would see the energy consumption going up because you need to run the aircon more. But if you only look at the energy, then for this big roof, because it's not just a simple solar shade, right? This is like, I mean, there's definitely some money spent on this roof. Then if you only look at energy, then the payback time would be quite long. But if you look at the fact that with this big louver roof, you can basically ensure that the windows, you don't have to pull down your own curtain. So therefore, the people actually have a view out. They can enjoy this direct connection with the greenery, and that relation to basically being more productive and enjoying their workplace more and having a higher sense of well-being and falling less sick. You can try to put some numbers on that, but that link to productivity is not so straightforward. You cannot get that out of a computer simulation software, right? So, and then convincing clients that this is the right thing to do if they're already skeptical, that's really difficult. So yeah, and also sometimes people just don't think that what we propose will work, because I think they're also just used to people coming in and claiming, this product will solve everything, right? And it's just sort of the dirty salesman that will just has one solution,
Just
right?
trying to sell you stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe they have been burnt a few times, and there's also a bit of skepticism, right? So that's why it's really important. I mean, when we get new jobs, that sure the client will screen us and try to make sure that we can actually deliver. But on our side, we will also screen the client. I mean, is this guy
Yeah. Do
serious
you
enough,
really want it or not, right?
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
because
So yeah,
yeah,
I love
because
that
really,
you
yeah, the
bring
human.
mental health or like the value of working in a environment and all that into the consideration as well, because I do believe like mental health, physical health is also part of sustainability. So by having that thought of like how the people can work, or it makes them less irritated with the heat, or they can walk around the greeneries, become more productive. It helps overall with the whole organization and the harmonious environment. So I love that you touch on that, and it goes into the consideration. However, since there's so many things that is happening in this space, in green building. There's so many solutions. There's so many, um, I don't know, in a way, techniques and all that. But in your thoughts, like, in terms of current and what it's, the future trend, you are seeing from now in the future, what do you see it in terms of green building?
Mm. Yeah, it's actually a very exciting period we are in right now, because actually right now we are in an energy crisis situation. The first one was actually around the time when I was born, where energy prices tripled more or less overnight because of the oil producing nations decided to limit the oil supply. And that was a real shock. And we are there now. I mean, I just came back from my home country of Denmark last week, and I had the interesting experience of filling petrol on my parents' car, and it cost me 620 ringgit. And that's because we're paying the real price for energy in Europe. In Malaysia, I did the conversion. You would only pay 120 ringgit. And that's because fuel is very subsidized. But once things become expensive, that also means you really have to do something about it. And not only that, now there's the understanding that climate change is real, and it's something we have to do something about. And Malaysia was one of the nations that last year signed the latest climate report from IPCC. Basically, all nations in the world more or less signed this. And in this report, it basically states that climate change is man-made. So I like to sort of make the analogy to the Titanic. So basically, we have now all agreed we are speeding towards an iceberg. And if we don't do something, not everyone is going to survive because the Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats. So we have now, all governments in the world have signed this document. We are speeding towards the Titanic. So we can no longer claim that we didn't know. And therefore, the obvious answer is to take rapid action, right? Because what are you going to explain your grandkids later if you kept speeding towards the Titanic? And that's in a way what Malaysia is doing right now. For example, with petrol. Petrol has remained really low. I think it's 2.5 ringgit per liter, right? In Denmark, where I just was close to 11 ringgit per liter. So the current policy is actually, okay, we know we're speeding towards the Titanic, but we are still saying full speed ahead. So the real transition, or the real direction, is to shift to a world that relies 100% on renewable energy. And this and actually renewables have become quite cheap. It's actually, if you factor in all the costs, then it's actually the cheaper option, because fossil fuels have a lot of externalities, so extra costs, especially from climate change and from air pollution, which is bad for human health. Millions of people die every year from air pollution in the cities. So if you factor that in, actually the cheapest way forward, if you go back to cost, is actually to make that transition to renewables. And that has a big impact on the building sector, because once you rely fully on renewables, then we have to make buildings that can use energy when the energy is available, and maybe not use energy when there's no energy available, or use less energy. So that means we need to make what's called grid interactive buildings, where the buildings have storage systems. So the most easy storage that's also on the way is electric vehicles. So we will, when you get home in the future and you have an electric car, you will plug it in. And what matters is that this car is charged by the next morning when you leave home, but it doesn't have to charge straight away, because maybe when you get home, that's when everyone gets home, switch on the aircon and starts cooking. So there's actually a fairly high energy demand. So the car will basically, through these smart systems, be aware that, okay, I shouldn't charge now, but then once we are in the middle of the night, let's say past midnight, where people have gone to bed and there's much less power consumption, then we can charge the cars. And if the grid has a problem, if there's a shortage of power, let's say there's a rainstorm or whatever, we could actually start pulling energy from the electric cars. So instead of charging the cars, we can also draw energy from the cars.
The car becomes a battery.
Yeah, exactly. So this is, what cars, I think electric cars would play a big role, but you could also design buildings to do this kind of thing. And we have actually already done so. For example, the pyramid building behind, we get 1/3 of the cooling by cooling down the concrete slab of the factory floor. And we've done this in other buildings as well. So this cooling doesn't have to be done right here and now. That could be done, let's say, when the solar energy is ready, and you just full blast cool this big concrete block. And then when there's a lack of energy in the grid, then you don't cool that block, and that cooling is just released slowly, right? So
it's not just electricity, right?
No,
It can be heat, it can be temperature and all that.
exactly.
Awesome.
So therefore, I think that's one of the future trends, where buildings will have to help out the electric grid with this flexible demand, because we're shifting more and more to renewables, and then we don't decide ourselves when the sun shines or the wind blows for the windmills, So building that flexibility into our buildings is definitely one of the future trends.
Amazing, exciting times. And I think with the technology involvement, everything is becoming more smarter. There's a lot of sensors, so you can become more efficient and do things that we cannot do previously. So I think if we want to talk about green building, it's never going to end. But we are at the end of the show right now. So for viewers and listeners, if you want to get connected with Gregers or his consultancy business, you can look up www.ien.com.my. And are you more active on Facebook or LinkedIn, Greg?
LinkedIn.
Yeah, so you can contact him through there as well. And so this is the end of today's episode. Thank you very much, Greg. And for all
Thank
viewers
you.
and listeners, thank you very much for spending your time. See you next week and have a green week ahead. Bye bye, guys.